Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Good
Professor.
afternoon.
Yes. Any questions? Anyone has any questions? Anyone started the homework already?
Yes.
Do you find any difficulties in it, or do you understand what's going on in as far as the homework problems are concerned? I think it's relatively simple. It's not that difficult. Basically, if you followed the lectures and you looked at the PowerPoints, I don't think you don't even need to look into the book to answer those questions. My lectures and the PowerPoints are more than sufficient to help you answer those questions. Anyway.
Wait, I'm confused. I thought the homework was from chapter 10.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Never mind. No, we're good.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. It's chapter 10, balance of payments. That's what the homework is on. And again, for those of you who were not here last time or were not able to look at the announcement I made on titanium, because I think a lot of students don't look at the announcements that I make on titanium, because I keep getting emails asking me questions that I have already answered on titanium announcements. So it seems like students may actually not be looking at the announcements very closely. Anyway, in the announcement, I pretty much extended the homework due date for November 12th. And believe it or not, I'm still getting some emails from students telling me, oh, is it okay to, I know I'm late in submitting the homework. Will I get penalized if I submit it now? That simply means that those students did not read the announcement or were not present here during the Zoom that we had, the Zoom session last time. Because if you did, you would already know that the due date is already postponed for November 12th. And as a result, you still have a chance to submit the homework. Okay. Today, what we want to do is we want to continue with chapter 10. Hopefully, if we are lucky, we should be able to finish this chapter today. Otherwise, we will spend the next session, at least half of the next session, completing this chapter. Today, what I want to do is I want to summarize very quickly what we have done so far. So at least I know everyone is on the same page. And then I will start to explain the relationship between the current account balance and aggregate income. In other words, that's the reason why we're interested in knowing something about the current account balance. We're interested in it because it affects our aggregate income. It affects our aggregate production. So how does it affect it? This is what we want to know. And that's why the reason why we study the current account balance. We will talk about that later on. Okay, to summarize very quickly. We said that the balance of payments summarizes basically all the transactions that take place, economic and financial transactions that take place between one country and the rest of the world. They are all nicely summarized in the balance of payments. The balance of payments consists of two major accounts, the current account and the financial account. The current account has three items, only three: net exports, net investment income, net unilateral transfers. All of these items will be recorded under the current account balance, nothing else. The current account is not interested in looking at anything besides these three items. So again, net exports, net unilateral transfers, net investment income. On the financial account, we have all the financial transactions, both private and government, that takes place between one country and the rest of the world. So all the financial transactions, private and government, will be recorded in the financial account. So you will see things such as, for example, purchasing foreign government bonds, foreign government securities, depositing money in a foreign bank. Suppose I want to deposit, let's say I have $30,000, I want to deposit them in a Japanese bank. So I can open a Japanese bank account and put my money there. I have $30,000 there. So this is what you see in the financial account. In other words, and also foreign direct investment. Let's say, for example, General Motors builds a factory in Japan. That will be in the financial account. The Fed purchases gold from the Central Bank of Japan. That will be recorded in the financial account. The Fed sells dollars to the European Central Bank, ECB. That will be recorded in the financial account. The Fed purchases SDRs from the Bank of England. That again will be recorded in the financial account. So all private as well as government financial transactions. And these financial transactions can be either on financial assets or physical assets. In other words, it's also possible for someone to actually purchase land in Japan or purchases a hotel in Germany. All of that will be recorded in the financial account. And we also said that the current account is a mirror image of the financial account. Meaning, if the current account happens to be negative 450 billion, then the financial account must be positive 450 billion. Why? Because the balance of payments must always balance to zero. And the reason why the balance of payment balances to zero is because we use what we call a double entry bookkeeping system. As long as you use a double entry bookkeeping system, the balance of payments will always balance. So do not make the mistake of saying that there is a deficit on the balance of payments or there is a surplus on the balance of payments. That will never exist because the balance of payments will always equal zero. Now you may have a deficit on the current account, and you may have a deficit on the financial account. You may have a surplus on the current account, or you may have a surplus on the financial account. All of that is possible. But when it comes to the balance of payments, the balance of payments will always balance to zero. Okay? So whenever your current account is in surplus, you know your financial account is in deficit, and vice versa. And we also said that in reality, it is very difficult to get the current account to be exactly equal to the financial account, simply because of errors, omissions, etc. And because of that, we are forced to add one more item, and that is known as the statistical discrepancy item. That statistical discrepancy item will ensure that the current account will be equal to the financial account. And we also talked about the 4 official reserve assets. Anyone remembers those 4 official reserve assets?
It was gold, SDRs, convertible currency, and the reverse position with the IMF, right?
Yeah, the reserve position
Yes.
that a country holds with the IMF. Now, does everyone know what the reserve position is? Anyone can help us out here? Tell us what the reserve position means? No? Okay. To make it simple. You know that commercial banks in the US all keep reserves with the Fed, correct?
Yes.
That's exactly what you have with member countries of the IMF. Each member country holds reserves with the IMF. They have an account, they call it the reserve account. And it's held with the IMF. Now, the good thing about this is the higher the reserve account is, the more, what shall I say, it gives each country more liquidity to play with. In other words, each country would be able to lend money to some other country. Why? Because they have a sufficient reserve with the IMF. They can always fall back on that reserve to, for example, pay debts, to get out of a current account deficit. In other words, be able to pay the deficit on their trade balance. So the higher the reserve position that you have, the better off a country feels about itself. And also, by the way, if I were to see this, the strength of the global standing of any economy, all what I need to do is simply look at the reserve position of each country and look at how much reserves they hold. Because that will give me an idea. Obviously, it will not give me the whole idea that I need to know about the full strength of a country's global standing, but it gives me some idea of what that country is doing. I'm going to say, hey, if that country can afford to keep such a high reserve position with the IMF, that means that country is doing pretty well, correct? Would you get the same impression here if you looked at the reserve position of countries with the IMF? Would you
To
come
hold
up
a
with the
high
same conclusion?
Yes.
They hold a
Yeah,
high
absolutely. I mean, it's like, for example, looking at your bank account. Look at your savings account, how much you have in your savings account. The more you have in your savings, the more you can play with your checking account, basically. Because you say, you know what, I can write a check for so much. If something happens, I still have a pretty good amount of money in my savings. So that's basically what we mean by the um, reserve position of countries with the IMF. It's very comforting, in other words, to know that my reserve balance with the IMF is pretty high because it allows me to do a lot of other things that I need to do. Okay, so that's basically, okay, one more thing. Do you know the reasons why countries would want?
Wait, I'm sorry, Professor. I think you cut out a little bit.
Cannot hear you.
Oh, you cannot, can you hear me
No?
now?
Yes.
Okay, everyone can hear me now?
I can hear you.
Okay. So probably those of you who can't hear me, maybe you have a problem with your audio? Okay, never mind. So what is the reason for countries to be holding official reserve assets? Now, if you read the book or if you read the PowerPoints, you should be able to answer that question very easily. Well, there are two reasons, basically. The reasons for holding official reserve assets, one is to help pay for any international debts that you may have, because countries will always accept to be paid in any one of those official reserve assets. They'll be more than happy to accept gold, SDRs, convertible currencies. So that's one of the reasons why countries would like to hold official reserve assets, because it helps them to settle their international debts. The other reason, of course, is also to help them basically take care of their trade deficits. So if they have a current account deficit, they can pay for that by using their official reserve assets. And number two, it can help the Fed to intervene in foreign exchange markets when the Fed feels that the value of the dollar is slipping. So if the Fed doesn't want to see the value of the dollar slipping, in other words, they want to maintain the value of the dollar where it is, then they have to intervene in foreign exchange markets and they need to purchase a lot of dollars. But how are they going to purchase those dollars with? They're going to purchase them with one of the official reserve assets, either by gold or SDRs or convertible currencies or whatever the case may be. So this is basically the reason why countries would like to hold official reserve assets. Okay, today what we want to do is we want to look at the relationship between the current account balance and aggregate income. And as I said, this is the main reason why we study the current account balance, because we want to see how it relates to aggregate income, aggregate production. What's the link between them? How are they related? What causes the CA, or the current account balance? What causes it to have a deficit? Or what causes it to have a surplus? What are the root causes of a trade deficit or a current account deficit? Now, in order to do that, we have to start all the way from defining what aggregate income is or aggregate production. Now, do you all know, how do we define aggregate income or aggregate production? What is aggregate income or aggregate production?
It's GDP.
Very good, GDP. So let me write this GDP down since someone said GDP. Okay, gross domestic product is simply defined as the total value of all the final goods and services produced within the borders of that particular country. So if I'm talking about the GDP of the US, then I'm talking about all the final goods and services produced here inside the US. And I don't care who's producing those goods. It could be domestic workers, it could be foreign workers. It could be domestic firms, it could be foreign firms. I don't care, I'm just gonna lump them all together. Everything that's produced in the US, that's part of GDP. We call that gross domestic product. So now gross domestic product is going to consist of consumption, expenditure by households, you and I, plus investment expenditure by business firms, plus government purchases at all levels, federal, state, and local, plus net exports, or exports minus imports. And this is your GDP. That's what GDP consists of. And I'm sure all of you are familiar with this from your principles of macro. Now, let's define another term that deals with aggregate income and aggregate production. And that term is gross national product, GNP. Now, what is GNP? Now, let me first define what GNP is. So, in other words, there is a difference between GNP and GDP. GNP simply looks at the value of all the final goods and services produced by US resources only. And I don't care where those goods are produced. They could be produced here in the US or in other countries. In other words, you may have US labor producing goods in Germany. You may have US capital producing goods in Japan. So everything that is produced by US owned assets or factors of production will come under GNP, gross national product. So gross national product will be equal to consumption plus investment plus government purchases plus net exports. I'm just going to call it NX for now, which is the same thing as X minus M, plus net unilateral transfers plus net investment income. See, because in these cases right here, we are really only including what the US produces or what the US sends out. We're not including what foreigners produce for us or what foreigners give us. We're taking that out from, that's why we have net here, net unilateral transfers, net investment income. Okay? Is this
Wait, I'm sorry, what are we taking out of
here?
net unilateral transfers
Yeah.
and income?
Okay, in net investment income, we're taking out all what foreign workers are producing in the US, the income that they're getting in the US by working in the US. So we're only looking at the income that is produced by US nationals, by US resources only. That's why we have net investment income. So we're taking out anything that is used by foreign resources, foreign workers, foreign capital, anything that is used to produce goods by non-residents is taken out. Same thing with NUT. NUT, net unilateral transfer, is simply showing you what really goes out from the income that we have produced to the outside world.
So wait, Professor, so when you are saying that GMP, when we calculate GMP on the NUT and NIY, we need to take out the portion foreigner produced?
Exactly, out. You got to take that out because that's what NIY is. Remember what net investment income is. Net investment income is simply computed as the income that we get from investing overseas minus what foreigners get from investing in the US. So you end up only with what US citizens are producing, or what US income is, or what US assets or resources are producing in foreign countries. And you are eliminating what foreign countries or what foreign laborers are producing for you here in the US. You're taking that out. That's why we come up with net investment income. Is this clear?
So same thing as the net unilateral
Right.
transfers.
Net unilateral transfers is what we get from outside minus what we pay to outside. That's net unilateral transfers. And it's always negative. So that negative number has to be taken out for the simple reason because it's taken out from our income. So this will always end up as negative. So it's going to reduce my income here. This will be positive. So it will always increase my income. Okay, so that's basically what GDP and GMP is. Those are simply the differences between them. Now, when we have that, then what we can say is we can say that GMP is equal to C plus I plus G plus CA, where CA is your current account balance. And if you remember, we defined the current account balance to be equal to net exports plus net unilateral transfers plus net investment income. Everyone remembers that?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's exactly what the current account balance is. So now I'm really moving towards isolating CA and seeing what CA is equal to, because that's basically my goal. My goal is to define CA in terms of economic aggregates, in terms of income, in terms of GMP. Okay, now I can also call this, give it a name, and I can say that this is nothing but the sources of income. In other words, what is the source of GMP? Where does GMP come from? Does it fall from the sky? How do we come up with this GMP? What makes GMP? It is consumption, investment, government purchases, and the current account balance. All of these four are responsible for producing GNP. So we call this equation the sources of income equation. So whenever you hear someone talk about the sources of income equation, this is exactly what they mean. GMP equals C plus I plus G plus CA. Okay? So far, so good. Any questions on that? Okay, let's move on. Also, GMP has sources of income, but it also, we can define GMP not only in terms of sources of income, in other words, where does GMP come from, sources of income, but we can also define GMP in terms of the uses of income. What do we use this income for? So we can say that GMP is equal to, is equal to, or GMP, or aggregate income, or the country's income, is actually used, part of it is used for consumption, part of it is used for saving, part of it is used to pay taxes. And we can call this uses of income. Sorry, we didn't have a don't worry about it. Uses of income. So we can use income or GMP, part of it for consumption, part of it for saving, and part of it to pay our taxes. From here, we can also develop another equation which says that for the economy to be in equilibrium, the sources of income must equal the uses of income. In other words, if the sources is exactly equal to the uses, then the economy will be in equilibrium. Remember from your principles of macro, for the economy to be in equilibrium, injections must equal withdrawals. These are known as injections, and these are known as withdrawals. So here we can say that C plus I plus G plus CA, these are the sources of income, must equal the uses of income, which is C plus S plus T. Now, if I bring this C to the other side, this would cancel with this C, correct? So they would cancel out. So if I do that, then what do I have left? What I have left is I plus G plus CA equals S plus T. So this is another equation that we have. Now, again, let's do some more manipulations. Let's take this G to the other side. So if I take this G to the other side, what will I have? I will have I plus I plus CA equals S plus T minus G, because I'm taking G to the other side, so it becomes minus. Everyone follows so far?
I have a
Yes.
question.
Yes, go ahead.
Why would it be in a parentheses with T?
No, I'm just putting them in parentheses. It doesn't matter. You can take that out if you want.
Oh, okay. And what is C, S, and T? I was driving home when the
Oh,
first
okay.
lecture.
Yeah. S is saving. T is taxes. G is government purchases. I is investment. CA is current account balance. Got that?
Yeah, and then C is consumption for both sides,
Yeah,
right?
C is consumption, yeah. C,
Thank
we
you.
got rid of that because it cancels out. Once you bring C to the other side, it becomes minus C. So C plus minus C cancels out, basically. So we got rid of the C's. We don't have to worry about the C's anymore. So now I have I plus CA equals S plus T minus G. Now S is private savings. When I say private savings, I simply mean savings by households, just like you and me, and savings by private businesses. So you may have firms, you may have banks, all of these are private businesses. So all the savings by individuals as well as businesses is private saving, which is S right here. T minus G refers to the federal budget, which means that if T, tax revenues, is greater than government purchases, then the budget will be in surplus. So if T is greater than G, we have a budget surplus. If T is less than G, we have a budget deficit. If T is equal to G, we have a balanced budget. So everyone knows what T minus G is? It is government saving. If this is positive, it's government saving. If this is negative, it's government dissaving. So if I add private saving to government savings, I will get aggregate savings. So I can write this also as I plus CA equals aggregate savings or total savings, which is private saving plus government savings. And I can also say that the current account balance is nothing but aggregate savings minus domestic investment. And this is exactly what I want to get to. So the current account balance does not fall from the sky here, right? There are two important economic aggregates that will determine your current account balance. What are those economic aggregates? It is aggregate savings and aggregate investment.
Wait, I'm
Professor,
sorry. Could you re-explain your like end point right there? I got a little bit confused.
Where did you get confused?
When we turned savings and taxes and government spending into you said it's aggregate savings, but then I got confused after. Could
Okay.
you please explain?
Yeah.
what is aggregate saving and investment turn into?
Yeah, aggregate savings again is private savings, this S right here, plus public savings or government savings, which is T minus G. So these two together make up aggregate savings or total savings. So in other words, I'm adding private savings with government savings, I will get aggregate savings or total savings. Okay, now I can say that investment plus the current account is simply equal to total savings because it's equal to S plus T minus G, which is total savings or aggregate savings. So from here, I can determine what CA is. The current account then must be SA minus I because I'm going to take this I to the other side. So it becomes minus I. So current account is simply equal to total savings minus investment. Investment here means domestic investments, which means investment in things such as factories, machineries, equipment, infrastructure, transportation facilities, in other words, ports, airports, real estate, investment in inventories, all of that is part of investment. That's what we mean by investment, domestic investment. Investment in technology, all of that is investment. So the current account depends on both what our aggregate saving is and what our total investment is. If our aggregate saving happens to be greater than our domestic investment, then the current account balance will be in surplus. However, if my aggregate savings fall short of my investment, then my current account will always be in deficit. So whether the current account is in surplus or in deficit, it depends on what happens to savings and what happens to investment. So for any government to address the current account deficit, they must find ways to control these two aggregates, saving and investment. Now, the reason why the US happens to have a deficit on its current account is simply because its savings rate is very, very low compared to its investment. In other words, if investment happens to be, let's say, 18% of GNP, in other words, investment accounts for about 18% of GNP, the savings rate in the US accounts for probably about 14% of GNP. So 14% minus 18%, that's minus 4%. So the current account balance is always in deficit to the tune of 4% of US GNP, which if you do the math, you will find that to be very, very close. So that's how I would know whether the current account is in deficit or not, by simply looking at savings and looking at investment. If I know exactly what is the savings rate as a ratio of GNP, and if I know what the investment rate is as a ratio of GNP, then I can tell you what the current account balance would be as a ratio of GNP, whether it's going to be positive or negative. It all depends on the savings rate and the investment rate. Is this understood, or anyone has any questions before we keep going?
So I have two questions. The first one is, when you were explaining why GNP was sources of income, but then you also said that it was source or uses of income. I'm just kind of confused on like why GNP is like both of those equations, and then
Okay, very good. Well, GNP can be defined as a source. In other words, you can compute GNP from a sources perspective, sources of income, or you can compute it from the uses of income. And if you do any of those two, you're going to come up with the same thing. So for the economy to be in equilibrium, your source of income must always be equal to the uses of income. Always. Because if it is not, then your economy is not in equilibrium. So for your economy to be in equilibrium, you have to have sources equal to uses. In other words, my income that I am able to produce as a result of C, I, G, and CA must be exactly equal to the income that I'm going to be using for consumption, saving, and taxes. If that is the case, then I have an equilibrium level of income. I can say that my income has reached an equilibrium level. But if that is not the case, if C plus I plus G plus CA happens to be greater than C plus S plus T, that means the economy is not in equilibrium. That means I'm producing a lot more than I want that income to be used for. In other words, I have a surplus. And simply, if my C plus S plus T is much greater than C plus I plus G plus CA, then I have a deficit. Then the economy is basically not producing as much as I want to spend, because I have to spend on consumption, I have to spend on savings, and I have to spend on paying taxes. But if I don't have enough income to do all of that, then my economy will not be in equilibrium. So for the economy to be in equilibrium always, the sources of income must equal to the uses of income. The sources of income is simply the injection, and the uses of income is simply the withdrawals. So if you are putting in 10 and you're taking out 10, so what do you think is going to happen to the equilibrium level of income? Will it change? You're putting in 10 and you're taking in 10, taking out 10.
No change.
There will be no change, correct. Then your income will be in equilibrium. There is no change. It's stable, it's in equilibrium. But if you're putting here 10 and you're only taking out 8, then obviously your income is going to do what? Increase or fall?
Wait, I'm sorry, you said we're getting 10, but we're taking out 8?
You're putting 10 in, but you're taking only 8 out.
You have surplus.
Will your income increase or will it fall? Will increase, because you're putting in 10. You're adding 10 to your income, but you're only taking 8. So you're adding 10 and you're subtracting 8. So what are you doing to income? Are you increasing it, leaving it the same, or decreasing it?
It increases?
Increases, of course. In other words, you are adding 10 plus 10, and you're taking out 8 minus 8. So 10 minus 8 is plus 2. So you're increasing it by 2. So we can say that income is changing here. Income is not stable. So the only way when income will be in equilibrium, in other words, there will be no change. That's what we mean by equilibrium. In other words, once a variable reaches equilibrium, then it does not have any tendency, there is no tendency for it to change. It's going to stay put. That's why we call it equilibrium. It's not going to move anywhere. It's not going to go up, it's not going to go down. It's going to stay right where it is. That's why we call that an equilibrium position. Simply because we don't expect any change to take place, up or down, minus or positive. So for income to be in equilibrium, sources of income must always equal to uses of income. That's why we made this side equal to that side. And when we do that, then we can take the C's out, because when you take C to the other side, it becomes minus C. So C minus C is 0. So you all have is I plus G plus CA equals S plus D. I plus CA is equal to S plus T minus G, because we took the G to the other side, so it becomes minus G. So S plus T minus G is simply your total savings, because this is private saving and this is government saving or public savings. So S plus T minus G will give you aggregate savings. So now we can say that the current account is nothing but aggregate saving minus investment. And for a country to address its current account deficit, it really has to look at these two variables, these two economic aggregates, aggregate saving and aggregate investment. So
Wait, I'm sorry. Could you repeat that one more time?
yeah, for the economy, for a country to address its current account balance, it must focus on two economic aggregates, which are aggregate savings and aggregate investment. Now, if a country happens to have a current account deficit, that would mean that SA must be less than I. If a country has a current account surplus, that means SA must be greater than I. So for the US, if you look at the US current account balance, you see that the US has experienced a deficit on its current account balance for the past 40 years. And the reason why is simply because the US savings rate is very low compared to its investment rate. The US saves a lot less than what is needed to fund investment. So if you look at the aggregate savings rate for the US, which is private plus government saving, you see that it is very close to about 16%. Well, it fluctuates from about 13 to 17. So let's say on average it's probably around 15%. That's the aggregate savings rate in the US. And investment is probably around 19%, because it also fluctuates between maybe, I don't know, 18 to 20. So let's take 19%. So if the savings rate is 15 and the investment rate is 19, so 15 minus 19, that will be equal to minus 4%. So the current account deficit in the US happens to be 4% of GMP. And that is all based on the savings rate and the investment rate. Now, sometimes we also refer to this as net foreign investment. So current account and net foreign investment mean exactly the same thing. So if the current account happens to be negative, net foreign investment is negative. If current account is positive, net foreign investment is positive. And net foreign investment, again, simply means aggregate saving minus investment. If net foreign investment is positive, that means aggregate saving is greater than investment, which means the US will be investing more overseas than foreigners will be investing in the US. That will give us a positive net foreign investment. If net foreign investment was negative, that means foreigners will be investing more in the US than the US is investing overseas. So whenever the current account is negative, that simply means we have, what can we say about the financial account if the current account is negative?
The financial account would be positive.
Very good. The financial account will be positive. What does that mean in terms of capital inflows? Capital inflows and outflows. When the financial account is positive. Remember, when the financial account is positive, that simply means we have a lot of capital inflow versus outflow. In other words, there is a lot of capital coming in, a lot of money coming into the US. That's why the financial account is positive. And basically, that money that's coming in, it is used to pay for the current account deficit that we have. So in order for us to enjoy all the goods that we get from outside and to pay for them, we have to attract foreign investment into the US. So basically, foreign investors are paying for the current account deficit that we have. Does that make sense? The relationship between the current account and the financial account, the relationship between the current account and the net foreign investment, the relationship between the current account and GMP, all of these things are important, by the way, and all these mathematical equations explain exactly what the relationship is between current account, saving, and investment. This is the most important equation right here. Current account is equal to aggregate saving minus aggregate investment. So the current account can be deficit or it can be in surplus. It all depends on what happens to SA and I. So the root cause of a current account deficit is our very, very low savings rate. In order to address that, the government has to make sure to shore up the savings rate, increase the savings rate. So the first thing they need to do is they need to balance their budget, because by balancing their budget and making us or having a surplus on the federal budget, that will increase government savings. So that's number one. Making sure that the government does not go overboard and overspends. Make sure that we at least have a balanced budget, if not a surplus. Number one. Number two, we have to encourage households to save more. And we could do that through tax reforms. We could do that by, for example, introducing retirement accounts, individual retirement accounts, whereby we can extend the cap on individual retirement accounts. So instead of saying you can only put $2,000 a year exempted from tax into your IRA account, well, we can increase this to maybe $6,000 a year. And this will encourage a lot of people to actually put more savings in their IRAs. So this is one thing that the government can do. The other thing, of course, the government can try to give incentives to people to actually save more money. Banks also can play a role by giving incentives to people to save more money by raising the interest rate on savings accounts. So there are many things that the private sector as well as the government can do to shore up the rate of savings in the US. And this is the only way that we can get rid of a current account deficit. There is basically no other way. So forget about trade policies, forget about tariffs, quotas, subsidies that happens to reduce imports and increase exports. That's not going to work because the current account deficit is not the result of our imports being greater than our exports. This is only the symptom. The actual cause is a low savings rate. This is the cause. But the effect, the symptom, is obviously we will end up with our imports being greater than our exports.
Professor,
Yes.
when you say give the incentive to people save more money, it's to increase the interest rate.
Yes.
Well, what happens if you increase the savings interest rate? How about the non-interest rate the bank charge to the customer to buy the house? Or
Yeah, that's true. That will affect it for sure. Yeah, that will affect mortgage rates. That will affect credit card rates. That will affect interest that you may be charged on a personal loan. Absolutely.
then how is a younger generation be able to buy their houses?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, as I said, there is always something that you have to give up in order to get something else. I mean, there is no such thing as a free lunch. So all what you need to do here is look at the costs and benefits involved. And, some policies are not popular. Some policies are very hard to undertake. And that's why, for example, you see a lot of social turmoil in a lot of countries. In Europe, in Greece, for example, in France. Why do you think we have this social turmoil? Simply because the government sometimes have to make decisions that are extremely hard, that will affect a lot of people. But you always have to look at the larger picture. I mean, yes, it may affect me individually, but what will it do to the country as a whole? And what will it do to future generations? So, sometimes you have to stop thinking about me and I and start thinking about something else. So it's not all about I, me, and myself. There are other things that you have to think about as well. And these are, some of the things that policymakers have to figure out and have to come up with the right solutions. Unfortunately, we are not there to be making these decisions because they are hard. They're hard decisions, difficult decisions. But someone has to make them. Now, as long as we make the right decisions based on cost-benefit analysis and based on looking at the economy as a whole, in other words, looking at the larger picture, then, I'm fine with that. But if these policies are not made accordingly, they are not very effective, and they tend to have leaks here and there, or that there is a lot of corruption involved in undertaking those, then I will not feel comfortable with that. So it all depends on who is making the policy, how are these policies being made, have they been studied fully, have they been analyzed fully, have you really come down to the nitty-gritty of everything that you need to pursue? So, there are a lot of things involved in these things. These are not easy things to do. Not very easy decisions to make. But as I said, someone has to make them. And as far as the US is concerned, we have a problem. We have a current account deficit. This is a problem. How do we take care of it? Do we take care of it by imposing tariffs? No, that's not the answer. So commercial policy really has nothing to do with it. Why? Because the current account balance depends on two important macroeconomic aggregates: saving and investment. We have to find ways to address these aggregates. That's where your solution lies. You can't be looking anywhere else because that's not going to help you. Because by definition, this is what the current account is: saving minus investment. And this did not fall from the sky. We started all the way from here, from aggregate income, aggregate production, and we came all the way down here to show that this is exactly what current account is, what determines the current account, and how do we need to address the current account. So these are the two things that you need to look for. Now, those of you, of course, who are writing your paper on the current account, this is extremely important. So if you do all of this, this would probably add you some points. All of these equations, if you put them in and you explain exactly what's going on, and then you come to current account equal SA minus I, and you explain what causes the current account deficit and how you go about remedying it, then obviously you pretty much have a good solid paper at hand. Okay, now, oh boy, I think we're out of time. So I'm going to stop right here, and if there are any questions, I'll be more than happy to take them.
So when is the homework due?
On November 12th.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
You're welcome. Make sure now, for those of you who have missed this, this is always on, you can get it on YouTube. It's recorded. And you can go on YouTube and check it out. Yeah, I will probably record this tonight, post it on YouTube. It's not yet posted. I have to post it. I'll probably do it later on tonight. But again, I mean, it's it will help you out, I guess, in understanding what the current account is. And hopefully next time we should analyze the current account a little bit more in terms of determining the benefits and the cost of the current account balance. And also, is it sustainable? Can a country, for example, sustain a long-term current account deficit or not? So, those are the things that hopefully we will talk about next time. Any other questions? Okay, then I'll guess I will just end this session and wish you all a good weekend for all of you. And
Have a good weekend, Professor.
thank you.
Thank you. You too, Professor.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you for teaching. Thank you.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.